West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Today is the first day of early voting in Texas, for the primaries being held on March 1st. This is the first election in which Texas will be able to test its brand new and highly restrictive voting law. And already, those new ID number requirements are creating major roadblocks for Texans who would like to vote. Harris County is the most populous county in the state, home to the city of Houston. Already this year, Houston has had to reject about 40% of all mail-in ballot applications because they were missing a proper ID number. This is happening all over the state. The number of mail-in ballot applications rejected from Dallas County is as high as 28%, and the rejection rate is 30% over in Williamson County, which includes the Austin suburbs. The issue here is not just that some voters are leaving this section blank or that they don't understand the directions. In a lot of cases, the problem is on the Texas end. CNN spoke with a Texas voter who tried to apply for a mail-in ballot. She provided her Texas driver's license number like the new law requires, but her application was denied because the number on her current license didn't match the one Texas had on file for her, the one she used 46 years ago when she moved to the Houston area. The point of this law, passed by Republicans in Texas, was to make it harder and more difficult to vote. And so far, it appears to be working. The top elections official in Texas's biggest county is named Isabel Longoria. She says, quote, "We are seeing in real time voters' votes being rejected." Joining us now is Isabel Longoria, the elections administrator in Harris County, Texas. Thank you so much for being here. Ms. Longoria, what are you hearing from voters as they process this new law?
I'm hearing a lot of confusion and fear. Questions being asked of what does this mean for my mail ballot? If my application gets rejected this year, does it mean it gets rejected next time? What does this mean not only for the primaries, but for the general? And ultimately, how can I fix this so I don't have this problem again? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. As we start early voting in person in Texas today, that's one of the big question marks for us election officials is what happens to those in-person voters? And are we going to see the same impact?
To that end, about how to fix the applications, is there a curative process? Are there resources to help people fix these applications so they can, in fact, get mail-in ballots?
Yes and no. For counties as big as Harris County, we actually have the staff to double up our call centers so that we can answer all the calls. In January, we got 8,000 calls to our call center, 5,000 of which were just for mail ballots. To put into perspective, in November for our local elections, we had maybe 5,000 calls for the entire month for everything. So we're seeing an increase in calls, an increase in pressure from local counties to meet the demands, again, with those call centers, with our outreach efforts, but it's a layering of issues. yes, there's an online database to cure your mail ballots from the Secretary of State, but you have to put in both of your ID numbers to even get into the database. So if you only have one ID number, you can't even get into the state's database to cure your mail ballot. And so, like I said, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. It's the layering of this, the new election laws, the confusion, the fear, the paperwork for the application, paperwork for the mail ballot, paperwork for curing. You've got to ask yourselves, are you really tearing down barriers to help voters, or are you just putting up more roadblocks?
It bears mentioning that it's not just Democrats who want to mail-in ballots, right? I mean, this is affecting Texas voters writ large, generally. Democrats, Republicans, independents. Is there a sense from the Republicans that were in charge of drafting this new law and largely passing it, that they have made a mistake and that things need to change? Are they trying to devote more resources? I mean, to what degree are people realizing the problems that they've created?
The big message I'm getting from the state right now is, well, it's a learning curve. Just sit and wait. But unfortunately, when it comes to votes, there is no learning curve, right? That is someone's vote being lost, period. That should never be a learning curve. That shouldn't be said flippantly. And that's my biggest concern right now is we election officials raised this last year when the election bills were being passed. These were the well predicted consequences of these actions. And yet we're still seeing this, oh, well, it'll get better over time mentality, which if you didn't believe us then, please believe us now. This isn't getting better. This is something baked into the laws, baked into the statutes that we're going to see, yes, rejection rates now, but yes, leading into the November midterms as well.
You know, the more you try and take people's right to vote away, sometimes the harder they fight for. And I just wonder, is the frustration being coupled with determination to get this right? I mean, what anecdotally can you share with us behind the frustration? Are people doubling down on their efforts, or are people, in fact, actually just giving up?
It's a really interesting question. First, we're going to see how many applications that we've sent back actually get cured. Same with those mail ballots. How many people actually take the step to fix or cure their mail ballots, and how many people actually come vote in person if their mail ballot falls through. We're on just day one here. I've heard from my staff that perhaps our in-person voting is a little higher than 4 years ago. That's a hopeful, but I think for some folks who, when we were election officials, were talking about the laws this summer, and it seems so theoretical. You know, oh, you're just fear-mongering. Oh, that's never going to happen. Now we're seeing the real-life consequences. And I'll say that wakes people up very quickly when you get a call from my office saying, well, because of the state laws, we have to reject your mail ballot. And they're saying, whoa, I never thought this would happen to me. I think you're right. Yeah.
It is happening, and it is happening now in Texas. Isabel Longoria, Elections Administrator in Harris County, Texas. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all you're doing to keep democracy moving.
It is Tuesday, the 15th of February of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. You know, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Okay, so how's your spicy Tuesday, huh? Is it spicy enough for you? Hey, we're not playing Mother Mayo here, and there are no raisins in the potato salad. Do not even attempt to do that. Don't. Just don't. Oh, a little bit of personal news, and this is not violating my HIPAA, okay? Because we know what a violation of HIPAA is, and it's not your HIPAA anyway, my HIPAA. Anyway, some of you may remember that I had to forego a show because I had such intense, debilitating pain from my knees. The right knee in particular. I do have knee problems in both knees. So, and of course, it was a flare-up of my severe osteoarthritis. Moms, do not let your boys play football, or even your girls. I hear they're doing that now, too. I know. Anyway, that was on the right knee, and I was told to stay off of it, of course. And, you know, I know this. I've been living with these knee issues since I was but a mere boy. And, a young man. And usually what happens, and as usual, is what happens is that one knee will start feeling really bad, and of course you favor that bad one, and in my case, I wear out the other one. And while that one, the worn out one, is, being rehabilitated, I use the other one, and I go back and forth. I seesaw. And I keep telling myself it's going to be bad when both knees go out at the same time, because then how do I get around? How do I get to the bathroom even? These are issues that, even though I read all the books and I took care of elderly relatives and friends, you just got to have like a bodily awareness before you can really have an understanding of what it takes to get old. Boy, am I finding out. All right. Well, I guess some people might consider it a form of denial all these decades. Oh, you're just denying that you're going to get old. No. I just really didn't know how much it would hurt. It's like being an immortal. They never told me that when they told me I was an immortal, they never said it was going to hurt so much or that you would scar. Jesus, what happened to beauty? I guess there's got to be some beauty in scars now. Hello, Baudelaire. So, I'm having now an issue in my left knee, which is where the partially torn ACL is, by the way. I do have knee replacements scheduled for both knees. I'm not going to do them both at the same time. I've been warded off of that. Do it one and then the other. But, of course, elective surgeries are, for at least in my case, are on hold because of a bunch of maskless, anti-vax, COVID-denying, brainwashed segment of society. Yeah, the fly in the ointment. So, except for their efforts, we would be living a life in which we would have adapted instead of one in constant conflict, one in constant denial that what is happening is actually happening. All right. I sometimes wonder what all of these small-minded maggots think when they watch the Olympics or anything that has an international affair to it. What they think about the rest of the world wearing masks and pretty much going about their lives because of wearing masks. Because if you read their timelines on various social media platforms, they make it sound like it's only happening here. And, of course, if it is happening in the world, well, then it's because of a cabal of Soros Jewish, Rothschilds running everything. And, of course, the only reason they're saying that is because they are being run by an international cabal of Nazis, corporate billionaire, trillionaire Nazis. And I'm looking at you, Peter Thiel. Yeah, libertarian my ass. I know in the future people say, oh, well, Peter Thiel wasn't a real Nazi because he was a libertarian. Yeah, right. Libertarian. Libertarian is just a nice way of saying libertarian for me, authoritarian over everybody else. Yeah, no. And it's not just Peter Thiel. Apparently, there's lots of them that we don't know about. You can't find out because, there's laws against being able to find out who the international cabal of Nazis are. I wonder who thought of that. And government's in cahoots with them. Oh, yeah, we'll go ahead and make laws so that people, like journalists, enemies of the state, so they can't find out who is financing all of this Nazi takeover of the world. It's not just happening here. Jeez. It's happening everywhere. I mean, think of Breivik. The guy there in Scandinavia who killed all of those 18, 19 to 23, 24-year-olds on a youth outing. Had a yearly gathering, and they go to this island in this lake. And first, Breivik had exploded some bombs at the Capitol buildings in Oslo, killing a couple of people there, and then went to this island and proceeded to slaughter 70, 80 of these kids. And I say kids, when they're 24, I mean, come on. I have osteoarthritis in my knees. They're kids. Okay? And, and he's a Nazi. Who funded him? Who gave him the idea? How does that just happen? Grassroots bull pucky. Nope. Even this BS happening up in Ottawa, and we have a little story about that here in the Bistro Cafe coming up. Or actually, I take that back. Oh, yes, not the Bistro Cafe. Back in the chef's table, we'll be speaking of that. Because it's Canada. So at the chef's table, we'll be speaking about Canada. And this blockade. It's not grassroots. It's AstroTurf. Just like the Tea Party. Notice how they call themselves the Freedom Caucus now? What's one of the strategies that these proto-Nazis use? That's to appropriate symbols for their own. How was it that the swastika was stolen from the ISIS cult? Well, Goebbels and Goering and others, they were into that mystical stuff. And they considered, those ancient religions quite mystical. So I've often been quite angry when I see the United States flag, the stars and stripes, appropriated by these proto-Nazis. And how can you tell that this is an international strategy? Because now the Canadian flag has been appropriated by these Nazis for their own. I continue to fly the flag here at the mothership, here in Rogue River proper, because I refuse to let these Nazis appropriate our flag. It's not theirs, it's ours. They can have their weird black flag with the blue stripe if they want. They can have that. Or some modification of the Gadsden flag. And the stars and stripes. Why not just put the Gadsden flag in where the stars are, since there's no United States there? Just put the Gadsden flag in there. Don't tread on me, mofo. F your feelings. Have that in the star field. Or instead of the star field. Have that. Yep. We get Old Glory. Okay? I know people are going to now say, Old Glory was the one with the circle of stars. Well, come on. You know what I mean. All right. So we have Q members taking over city councils and school boards. Do we continue to allow that to happen? Proud Boys running for office. This is just like the beer hall push. This is just like Nazi Germany in the late 20s and the 30s. Just like it. Oh, you don't know about it? Oh, well, I'm being rhetorical. We know about it because we're of a certain age. But it is amazing that a vast majority of young folk know nothing about the Holocaust, so do you really think they're going to know about the beer hall putsch? Do you really think they're going to know about the Reichstag fire? Do you really think they're going to know about the Night of the Long Knives? Or Kristallnacht? All they know is that they're wearing yellow stars because they're being persecuted because they have to wear a mask. My God. And then the same argument from these same folk who say the mask is causing great psychological harm without ever considering the fact that daily shooter drills, active shooter drills, where the kids are hiding in a closet whimpering, that has no psychological effect upon them. That's just to be ignored. but because some authority that happens to be, I don't know, doing something for the goodwill of all. That's considered evil by the Nazis, because that means you have to extend it to the Jews and the Gypsies and everybody, all those dark races, too. They're taking my freedoms away. Yep. Which reminds me, there was a great melding at the halftime show of a couple of different long-standing issues in our society, and maybe any society. Because I remember when rock and roll was first played at the halftime show, and that was like, these damn hippies and these commies playing their rock music and they're at the halftime. Rah, 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 rah. So now when they have hip-hop, it's not only just like, what is that music? I don't know. I want to listen to Todd Rundgren or whatever. And Travis Twit. What's this guy? Travis Twit? I like to call him Travis Twit. Listen to him. So it added the a component of race in there too, not just a generational schism, but the race component too, because, I don't know, I think hip-hop is aligned with the diaspora in some way, maybe. And in the racist mind, it's like, you should have seen, and maybe you did. I wouldn't suggest going to check out the comments and timelines of all these maggots about the halftime show. Because it was a weird meld of race and generational issues. Yeah, why don't they play stuff that most of America likes? Well, I don't know, because hip-hop's only been around since... this is the other thing that cracks me up. They say it's like 25 years. Hip-hop's been around since the late 70s. I mean, come on, funk and then hip-hop. Jesus, Funkadelic? It's getting right on there. Let alone, I don't know, Parliament. Jeez. Anyway, that was music that my late son Israel and I would listen to when he was in his 20s. It's not like it's, come on. It's not like it's just happening now. But that's the generational thing. There were people that thought Bing Crosby was, I don't know, a little too exotic for my tastes. Bing Crosby. So every generation has it, except I love this one because it had the added component of race. Okay. Oh, I got to say another thing. The stage set and lighting and the dancing and all that at the halftime show with you can't really call it a skyline because everything's sort of like strip mall level, like 3 stories is a very tall building. But regardless, the cityscape of Compton. That whole stage set was very Jacques Demy-like. Jacques Demy, the French director who did Muleskin. Yeah, you got to see that one. That's actually probably a bit better than his great film, De Pluriplie de Cherbourg, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Very Jacques Demy-like. I was quite taken with it. And apparently I'm supposed to be an old white guy. Apparently. Anyway, how's your Tuesday going? I hope it's going well because we have nothing to do but to continue going on and being a bulwark against, this international Nazi takeover of all representative democracy, wherever it might be. Well, you know what? We went through all that BS and we're not going to go through it again, at least not hopefully the level that it had been fought before. But I'll tell you, if you don't punch a Nazi now, the Nazi will be taking you to the camps. They will. They already have a track record of it. Okay, well, you know what? We could just continue ranting and ranting and ranting, which is what we sometimes do. When I say we, I mean the royal we. But we do have a curated show for you today because we take the time to curate a show, so we might as well, let you in on the secret. And what is that secret? Well, of course, at the top, Republicans are seeing some early success at damaging elections with their flurry of new voting restrictions. Oh, you want a drop box? No, you can't have that. Paper ballot? That's going to leave a paper trail. We can't let you have that. Oh, no. On the rest of the menu, as we continue in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, the Democratic Party eyes key governor races as a backstop against the GOP dismantling of democracy. The GOP is positioned to grab left-leaning Nashville after they gerrymandered the U.S. House map. And a gunman attempted to assassinate the Jewish Democratic mayoral candidate in Louisville, Kentucky. Guy came right barreling through the front door and started firing a shot point blank at the guy. Grazed him. Eek. After the break, we moved to the chef's table, where a public inquiry opened over the wrongful convictions of hundreds of British postal workers because of a faulty computer system. In some cases, we're talking 700. And when we say convicted, we're talking about incarcerated. In some instances, over 3 years. Wow. It's called the most scandalous legal scandal in British history. Legal history, at least. And Canadian police arrested 11 people linked to the border blockade, seizing over a dozen long guns and as many handguns, along with thousands of rounds of ammunition. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us the funds that you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, if you could send those funds to us once a month, it really helps us in paying our bills. And we found out in the almost 11 years of continuous 24/7, 365 resistance broadcasting, we found that when we pay our bills, we can fly under the radar and continue on this almost 11 years of continuous 24/7, 365 resistance radio. And we have you to thank for that. Though, as Tom will tell you a little bit later on, the bulk of how we do this comes out of our own wallets. We would still be unable to do it without you. So if you could be so generous, it would really help us, especially now. Jeez, everything's going up, as you know. But thank you for your generosity, and give you a little bit of pre-thanks for generosity in the future. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, it's so simple. You just go to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter @JusticePutnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes. It's not a story. I don't care what they're saying or calling it now. It's a diary. On Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then post that up on social media. And you know where, like Twitter, and you know where else. And, of course, you know the show notes and links are the integral part of this whole multimedia operation, because that's where the real reportage is. You can also follow the show on Twitter @Cookbook West. And most importantly, please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And don't forget, the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library is at the Internet Archive at archive.org. And we'll get the link to that when we do our yearly update, which is happening real soon here on our homepage at netrootsradio.com. Otherwise, links are in the show notes and links diaries. And at least you can find the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy show in the Netroots Radio Library. And from there, you can find the rest of our shows that we've had over all these many years. Okay, let's tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe. Yes, in the salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oh, and we have saved some room for the amuse-bouche at the chef's table. We do things backwards here because we're Americans. You know, we eat the salad first and the amuse-bouche last. How fancy that. Well, Thomas Beaumont of the Associated Press brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers was in a familiar spot earlier this month when Republican legislators sent him a bill that would have banned anti-racist teachings in schools for the 66th time. That's 66. Since taking office in 2019, he pulled out his veto pen. The rejection was the latest reminder of the crucial role Evers and a select group of fellow Democratic governors play in some of the most politically divided states. They are the only backstop against a wave of GOP-backed legislation targeting everything from abortion rights and school curricula to access to voting. I have to prevent some really bad things from happening, Evers said in an interview. It is a bit lonely, but I know I'm representing the people of Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin is one of 4 states emerging as top priorities for Democrats in an election year when the party is facing fierce political headwinds. Yeah, I would say so. In those states, Kansas, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, Republicans control the state legislatures, and Democratic-held governorships are on the ballot in the fall. If the governorships switch parties, a flood of GOP legislation that has so far been blocked would likely become law. That's especially concerning for Democrats when it comes to voting rights. The 4 incumbents, Evers, Kansas Governor Laura Kelly, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf, have vetoed more than a dozen bills aimed at restricting voting. Those moves were particularly important in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, all narrowly divided states that could decide the 2024 presidential election. If Republicans win the governor's race in any of those states, they will almost certainly approve voting restrictions that have so far been rejected. And how about just kicking out all the volunteers running the elections, manning the elections, put in your cronies and your armed brown shirts in all the voting places, and install your own people to count the votes and to certify them. Who did this before? Was that the Nazis who did that? Is that what the Enabling Acts were all about? I wonder how that happened. In Wisconsin, for example, the legislature is fast-tracking a host of bills, changing election administration, there you go, and voting rules, all of which Evers is expected to veto, but that other Republican candidates for governor support. Governors also have an important role in the mechanics of presidential elections. Under federal law, the electors, they say, reflect the winners of their state, get extra weight in any congressional fight over certifying the choice of the next president. That means in more extreme scenarios, GOP governors may seek to reject Democratic electors in a presidential race, a step then President Donald Trump pressed some Republicans to take in 2020. You know, illegally, but apparently when a Republican does it, it's okay. Many GOP candidates running for governor this year have expressed support for Trump's lie that the last election was stolen. Well, they think it's stolen because they always have to win. And if they don't, it was stolen from them. The refs stole it from us. Let's change the refs. We'll put our offensive coordinator in there and he'll referee it. Is that how it works? In Wisconsin last week, State Representative Timmy Rumpfin, a conspiracy theorist who was disciplined by Republican leadership over false election claims, filed paperwork to run for governor. Democrats are not limiting their work this year to protecting their position in the 4 states in question. They are also hoping to pick up Republican-held seats in states like Georgia, Massachusetts, and Maryland. But the DGA is stepping up its opposition research on Republican candidates in Kansas, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And the Democratic candidates themselves are sitting on sizable campaign accounts. Jonathan Matisse of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Black college students once marched downtown from the North Nashville neighborhood where Aaron Marble preaches, sitting at whites-only lunch counters to fight for civil rights. Soon, his historically black community will fold into a mostly rural, white 14-county territory, and he'll likely have a Republican congressman. Reality set in for Marble when longtime U.S. Representative Jim Cooper, a white moderate Democrat, said he would not run again because even if he couldn't win any of the 3 new Nashville seats drawn by Republicans during the once-a-decade redistricting process. The new maps will amount to a stark shift for Nashville, which encompasses Davidson County. As one of 3 Tennessee counties that backed President Joe Biden in 2020, it's home to the type of coalition of younger progressives, white moderates, and African Americans that Democrats have increasingly relied on. Now, voters there face the potential of representation mostly at odds with their political views, including broad-based support for greater health care access and immigrant rights. There's particular concern that the new lawmakers will be hostile to protecting voting rights, an issue especially resonant in the city where John Lewis, Diane Nash, and other civil rights leaders got their start. Black Nashvillians have been feeling the weight of living in a red state for quite some time, but I think this redistricting will have deep and lasting adverse impacts on some of Tennessee's most vulnerable politicians, said Marble, Jefferson Street Missionary Baptist Church's senior pastor. The once sleepy southern city has fueled much of Tennessee's population growth through thriving health care and tech industries. Construction cranes hover over new steel and glass structures that sprout up into a Nashville skyline that looks dramatically different from the one Bob Dylan turned into an album title in 1969. The cost of living has skyrocketed. Navigating that will be a challenge for lawmakers who will also represent rural and suburban communities, white races, where the prevailing politics range from moderate to conservative Republican, which means Nazi sympathizers to full-blown Nazis. What Tennessee Republicans did in Nashville is a standard gerrymandering technique known as cracking, which dilutes a party's power by spreading its voters among multiple districts. The prototype of this approach last decade was Austin, which Texas Republicans split into 6 congressional districts. And of course, the only way they were able to do that was getting rid of the Voting Rights Act. Piper Hudspeth Blackburn and Bruce Schreiner of the AP bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Democratic mayoral candidate who just happens to be Jewish in Kentucky's largest city said he is shaken but safe after a man stormed his campaign headquarters yesterday, Monday morning, and fired a weapon point blank at him. Craig Greenberg, who was running for mayor of Louisville, said he was at his campaign office with 4 colleagues when a man appeared in the doorway with a weapon. When we greeted him, he pulled out a gun, aimed directly at me, and began shooting, Greenberg said in a news conference several hours after the attack. The person closest to the door managed to get the door shut, he said. The staffers barricaded the door using tables and desks, and the suspect fled. Despite one bullet coming so close that it grazed my sweater and shirt, no one was physically harmed, Greenberg said. We are shaken but safe. Greenberg said he has not yet seen his family, or had not yet seen his family, though he had spoken with his wife on the phone after the attack and was anxious to get home. And while he declined to talk about the assailant's possible motive, he made a point to connect his experience to gun violence. Today is not a day for politics, but it is not lost on me that the violence my staff and I experienced today is far too common in our city. I would say in the whole of the nation. Back to Greenberg. Too many Louisville families have experienced the trauma of gun violence. Police say the motive remains under investigation. The suspect appears to have acted alone, they said. Greenberg would not say whether he recognized the suspect. Governor Kentucky Andy Beshear decried the attempt on Greensburg's life and called for swift action to punish the perp. Police responded to the scene about 10:15 a.m. after reports came in of an active aggressor. The suspect was apprehended outside the building shortly after the shooting. And that Louisville Metro Police Sheriff Erica Shields said earlier, she concurred that Greenberg appeared to have been the target of the attack. Really? Now, Greenberg launched his mayoral campaign last year and has built a big fundraising lead in a crowded race to succeed outgoing Mayor Greg Fisher. A prominent businessman, Greenberg worked as CEO of 21C Museum Hotels and also served on the University of Louisville Board of Trustees for a couple of years. Charles Booker, a Louisville Democrat running for the U.S. Senate, called the shooting a critical reminder of the work we must do to realize true community safety. I would add it would be really nice if Republicans will stop encouraging their followers to kill Democratic candidates running for office. Yeah, this is becoming far, far too common. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Ashley Papp. Monogamy in animals, and let's be honest, in humans too, is a funny thing. Only a few animal species have been lumped into the one partner for life category, and even then, there are exceptions to those rules. Prairie voles are furry little rodents that live throughout North America. They're a particularly interesting species because they form lifelong partnerships. Annalise Beery, a behavioral neuroscientist with Smith College in Massachusetts and the University of California at Berkeley, studies vole monogamy in the wild and in the lab.
So I would define monogamy as a formation of a lasting partnership or a social relationship between mates. Social relationships are very important for human biology, and prairie voles are one of the only species that are studied in the lab that exhibit this trait. Monogamy is fairly rare in rodents, and it's also unusual for rodents to form lasting social relationships of any kind.
We already know about some things that support monogamy in the wild, like when mates are scarce and it makes sense to hold on to the one you're with, or when both sexes stick around to raise their young. But so far, there isn't one clear explanation as to why or how animals opt for only one partner. Whatever the reasons, staying monogamous requires effort from both sides. To better understand how lifelong bonding works, Beery and her team wanted to know if both male and female prairie voles make equal investments in making the long haul work. To find out, the researchers set up an experiment with 3 phases. In the first phase, they had to teach the prairie voles how to open a door controlled by a lever.
It was actually really hard to get prairie voles to press a lever for a reward, and we had some voles who never learned the task, and they were not included in the study. We had other voles who learned to press the lever in non-typical ways. One female liked to sit on the lever in order to activate it. And then one day, something clicked and she turned around and started pressing it with her paw and getting the food pellet in the ordinary way.
The team built on that skill by associating the lever pressing with a door opening. In phase 2, there were 2 doors controlled by 2 different levers. One of the doors led to a cushy rodent pad complete with wood shavings, fresh produce, and even Cheerios, while the other led to a shallow pool of water. And just FYI, these rodents really aren't into swimming pools. The voles could distinguish between 2 doors, 2 levers, and 2 different outcomes. And ultimately, both the males and females overwhelmingly pressed the lever that took them into the cushy chamber over the water torture. In phase 3, they took a quick break from the lever pressing and introduced each vole to a member of the opposite sex. The 2 voles got 48 hours to bond and grow fond, and then the lever pressing resumed. Each of the trained voles were given the option of 2 levers and 2 doors again. But this time, one of the doors led to their partner, and the other led to a new member of the opposite sex. After all the little vole-sized levers were pulled, Beery and her team analyzed the results. They found that even when it comes to monogamous prairie voles, males and females sometimes have different priorities.
So females worked hardest to get to familiar male mates versus unfamiliar strangers. The males were interesting because they showed diverse behaviors. Some of them acted like the females and worked hardest to get to their mates consistently over the course of the study. Other males consistently worked hardest to get to unfamiliar females, and yet other males were sort of intermediate, where they would press more for a familiar female on one day and an unfamiliar female on the next day.
Their results were published in the journal Genes, Brain, and Behavior. Overall, this points to a big difference between the sexes when it comes to social motivation. In other experiments, vole researchers have observed wandering, or a preference by males for the unfamiliar females. But many of those studies were performed out in the wilds, and this research removed those external pressures. That seems to mean that some of these little males were sometimes flighty about staying true to their mate because, well, maybe they felt like it. According to Beery, putting vole monogamy to the test helps us better understand the different types of human relationships and our process for selecting who we spend time with. For prairie voles, the investment seems a bit skewed to the female side. But no need to throw shade on the males, Beery says. There's likely a legit explanation out there. And while science looks for that reason, maybe don't give up on finding your one true love quite yet. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Ashley Patt.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Phyllis Wheatley was a well-known African-American poet of the Revolutionary period. Born in West Africa, she was taken as a slave when only about 7 years old and sold to John and Susanna Wheatley of Boston in 1761. Susanna Wheatley intended to use Phyllis as a servant, but discovered that Phyllis was unusually intelligent for her age, so she allowed her children to teach her how to read and write. She soon showed an unusual talent for writing poetry. Her first poem was published in 1767, when she was only 13, a mere 6 years after landing in America. Her fame began to grow. After a trip to England to meet a group of influential supporters, Phyllis Wheatley's first book of poetry was published in London in 1773. She was freed by the Wheatley family in 1774, shortly before Susanna died. She famously wrote a poem to honor George Washington in 1776, who acknowledged her talent in a letter. In 1778, Wheatley married John Peters, but soon fell on hard times. Over the years, she would continue to publish her poems, but would die in poverty in 1784. Nevertheless, Phyllis Wheatley Peters was the first African American to publish a volume of poetry and served as an inspiration to abolitionists in Revolution-era America and Britain. This has been 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. We need to spend money on healthcare, schools, housing, not a war budget. This was the statement of Fred Pecker, a member of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Local No. 6. On this day in labor history, the year was 2003. Fred, who was protesting in San Francisco, was just one of the estimated 10 million people in 800 cities across the globe that protested the U.S. war in Iraq that day. The Guinness Book of World Records declared the protests the largest in human history. The official U.S. labor response to the Iraq War, just as in wars before it, was mixed. Some unions supported the war, while others passed resolutions against it. Others stood silent, focusing on their contracts and domestic labor issues instead of taking a public stand on an international conflict. In New York City, 30 unions representing 500,000 workers publicly endorsed the February 15th protests. A month before the massive protests, anti-war unionists across the country formed the organization U.S. Labor Against the War. The coalition pushed for the AFL-CIO to take a stance against the war. Their efforts were successful 2 years later. In 2005, at their national convention in Chicago, the AFL-CIO passed a resolution calling for the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq. 3 years later, on May Day 2008, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union shut down the West Coast ports in protest of the war. What Fred, the longshoreman's comment on this day in 2003 revealed is that the lives of rank-and-file working people are impacted by war, wherever they or their union personally stand on the issue. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We are going to skip the local weather report and move directly into the international weather. And weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 50 degrees with rain. Paris is 49 and cloudy. Rome is 55 and mostly cloudy. Kyiv is 37 and fair. Kabul is 32 and clear. Hong Kong is 58 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 40 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 72 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 44 and sunny. And New York, New York is a freezing 21 degrees Fahrenheit. But my God, is it sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. This first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Sylvia Way, writing for the Associated Press. A public inquiry opened in London yesterday, Monday, to examine the wrongful convictions of hundreds of British postal workers who were accused of theft, fraud, or false accounting because of a faulty computer system. Between 2000 and 2014, more than 700 postal workers were wrongfully accused, with some convicted and sent to prison. The mistakes represented one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in British legal history. The failures were blamed on a defective computer accounting system called Horizon that was installed in local post office branches in 1999. The system was supplied by the Japanese technology firm Fujitsu. You know, they made camera film. The post office maintained for years that data from Horizon was reliable and accused branch managers of dishonesty when the system showed money was missing. In April, the Court of Appeal overturned the wrongful convictions of 39 people who ran local post offices. Lawyer Jason Bear told a hearing that the inquiry was not about an IT project gone wrong, but about the devastating impact the failures had on those it affected.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous staff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Police in the Canadian province of Alberta broke up a group that was supposedly prepared to use violence to back a truckers' blockade at a border crossing with the United States. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police said they arrested 11 people and seized 13 long guns as well as handguns and a large quantity of ammunition. Thousands of rounds, actually. Those arrested were reported to have a willingness to use force against the police if any attempts were made to disrupt the blockade, the force said in a statement. Well, they caught him before they acted. I wonder where the guns came from. I wonder. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.